You ever hear of a motorcycle so outrageous it made police departments nervous, bankrupted its builder and left its competitors crying into their oil cans? That's not a campfire story, it's the real deal. It's the 1915 Cyclone V-Twin, a machine so advanced, so deadly and so scandalous it practically rewrote the rules of motorcycle racing before being buried by history. We're talking about an era when roads were mud, brakes were optional, and safety was a suggestion no one followed. Into that madness roared a bright yellow demon that could top 100 miles per hour on a wooden velodrome built like a giant cereal bowl. It didn't just look fast, it was fast. In fact, the Cyclone's design was so cutting-edge it would take decades for other manufacturers to catch up. But here's the real kicker. Its secrets were so well hidden, even historians still argue about them. So get ready. Today we're pulling back the dusty tarp on the 1915 Cyclone V-Twin's hidden secrets. And let me tell you, it's going to get wild. Oh, and before we really open up the throttle, smash that subscribe button like you're stomping on your old Kickstarter on a cold morning. Go on, give it a good one. It keeps these stories alive, and it tells me you want more deep dives into legendary machines. And trust me, you'll want to stick around to hear how this bike's radical engine design would have changed racing history forever if it hadn't imploded in one of the messiest business disasters of its era. Let's start at the core. The Cyclone's 996cc 61 cubic inch V-Twin. Now, 61 cubic inches sounds cute today. Some modern Harleys sneeze bigger engines, but in 1915, this was like dropping a fighter plane engine into a soapbox car. But the real magic wasn't in the size, it was in the design. The Cyclone used overhead cams. That's right, overhead cams, in 1915. Meanwhile, other brands were still using push rods like they were building tractor engines. The Cyclone's dual overhead camshafts were driven by a vertical shaft and bevel gears, exotic, expensive, and insanely advanced. Why does that matter? Because overhead cams reduce valve train mass, allowing higher RPMs and better breathing. Result? More power, smoother power. The result? Around 45 horsepower. Think about that. Most competitors were putting out 20-30 horsepower at best. The Cyclone wasn't just beating them, it was humiliating them. And here's the thing, this wasn't just about top speed. That overhead cam design laid the foundation for performance motorcycle engines for decades to come. But if you think the engine was impressive on its own, wait until you hear about its fuel system, because that's where the real dark art came in. Okay, let's talk about how you feed a beast like this. Cyclone didn't slap on any old carburetor. It used a Shebler racing carburetor that was customized for the engine's airflow needs. But that wasn't even the coolest part. Riders and tuners back then would obsessively rejet these carbs, adjusting for altitude, humidity and temperature. It was race day tuning in the truest sense. There was no fuel mapping button, no laptop, no fancy sensors, just a guy with a wrench and a death wish. And let's talk oiling. The Cyclone had a total loss lubrication system. Riders actually had to manually adjust the oil flow while racing. Yes, picture this. You're blasting at 100 miles per hour on a wooden track, banking 60 degrees, one hand on the throttle, the other on an oil adjuster. Kind of makes texting and driving seem tame, right? This crude system was genius in its own way. Racers could give it more oil when it got hot, cut it back when it fouled plugs. It was an early, hairy-chested version of live engine management. But here's the dirty secret. This system wasn't just practical, it was necessary. That high-performance overhead cam head needed superior lubrication. Without it, you'd seize the engine faster than you could say hospital bill. And here's the thing. These fuel and oil tricks were so effective, they would inspire future generations of tuners. Think racing carbs, adjustable jets, even modern EFI systems with live tuning. But that's not all. You know what they say, with great power comes great ways to die. Let's talk about the frame. Okay, so the engine is insane, the fuel system is basically black magic, but you need something to bolt it to, right? Cyclone's designers knew they needed the lightest, stiffest frame possible to survive the high G-forces of board tracks, so they built a stripped-down steel frame that weighed next to nothing. It had just enough strength to avoid folding like a lawn chair on the banking. But here's the horrifying part. They intentionally removed anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Brakes, optional, front brake, forget about it. Rear brake? If you were lucky, you got a basic coaster brake. But many racers removed even that for weight savings. So how did you stop? You didn't, you planned ahead, or you crashed. It was so dangerous that riders would routinely die on the track. There were documented cases of bikes going into the stands, spectators too close. Sorry, no refunds. But here's the thing. The Cyclone didn't just survive on these tracks, it dominated them. Because its frame was so light it could flick around the bank turns with terrifying precision. That extreme design choice would later influence racing frames for decades. Lightweight, stiff, minimalist. And just wait till you hear about the insane places they actually race these things. Let's talk about board tracks. These were giant wooden velodromes, oval bowls made from pine planks. Imagine a NASCAR track, but with 2x4 S and nails sticking up if maintenance was behind schedule. And they were behind schedule. The banking could be 45, 60 degrees or more. Riders hit 100 miles per hour on a surface that would splinter if you sneezed on it. There were no helmets, leathers were primitive at best, and remember, no real brakes. Crashes were inevitable. Spectators sat inches from the racing line. One bad slide and bikes would go airborne into the crowd. The death toll was appalling. And the Cyclone, it thrived in that chaos. Its insane power-to-weight ratio let it rocket out of turns and hold lines other bikes couldn't. Riders who could tame it became legends. But here's a dark twist. The board tracks themselves killed the Cyclone's market. As the public got squeamish about the death toll, local governments banned board track racing. Cyclone lost its prime venue. Which brings us to the sad, messy demise of the company itself. Here's the part of the story that'll make you want to kick a toolbox. The Journes Motor Manufacturing Company in St. Paul, Minnesota, built the Cyclone. They weren't some fly-by-night garage. They had serious engineering talent, but they had a fatal flaw. They were too ambitious. Building a dual overhead cam engine in 1915 wasn't cheap. Tolerances were tight. Machining was expensive. They sold the Cyclone at a premium price, which limited its buyers to racers and the wealthy. But worse, they couldn't mass-produce the bike well enough to make it profitable. Spare parts were hard to get. Mechanics didn't know how to work on the fancy OHC heads. Customers started getting frustrated. Then World War I broke out. Materials went to the war effort. Consumer demand for high-speed death traps plummeted. By 1917, Journes was bankrupt. Total production, maybe 300 to 500 bikes, that's it. The company that made the world's fastest motorcycle didn't die from competition. It died from its own brilliance. But there's a silver lining. The Cyclone's early demise preserved its legend in amber because it never got diluted. It never went soft. It never got civilized for commuters. And that legend would go on to influence performance bikes in ways you wouldn't expect. Here's the thing. Cyclone disappeared as a brand, but its ideas didn't. That overhead cam design was decades ahead of its time. It influenced European race bikes in the 1920s and 30s, and after World War II, the Japanese took those lessons and ran with them, building high-revving overhead cam engines that would conquer the world. The concept of sacrificing comfort for speed, that's the entire ethos of sport bikes, and today, the Cyclone is one of the most sought-after motorcycles on Earth. Only a handful survived. They're worth a fortune. One sold for over $500,000. Collectors prize them not just because they're rare, but because they represent pure, unfiltered speed from a time when racing was as much about courage as engineering. And here's the coolest part. Some of these 100-year-old bikes still run. They fire up with that snarling exhaust note that terrified the competition in 1915. You can hear the cam gears whir, you can smell the raw gasoline. It's like time travelling to an era when men risked their lives for speed, and the Cyclone was the ultimate ticket to that ride. If that doesn't give you goosebumps, check your pulse. So there it is, the shocking hidden secrets of the 1915 Cyclone V-Twin. A machine that was too smart for its own good, too fast for its era, and too wild to survive in a world that wasn't ready for it. But in that brief moment, it redefined what was possible. It wasn't just a motorcycle, it was an engineering statement, a roaring gasoline-soaked promise that speed would always find a way. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe. We've got more wild stories, engineering deep dives, and historical secrets coming your way. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the craziest ideas leave the deepest marks on history.